All right. So again, Darwin was definitely a naturalist, and he's among other people who are starting to go out into the field and to collect things and to collect evidence and to start to kind of move more towards this scientific method realm of trying to figure out answers to big questions, right? Answers to those kind of age-old questions. In 1831, at 22, Darwin basically is appointed the naturalist on the Beagle with Captain Fitzroy. It's a 5-year voyage around the globe. Interesting book, Evolution's Captain. It's all about that voyage of the Beagle, which is really cool. It's not about necessarily kind of the Darwin aspect. It takes kind of more the ship and the captain's perspective, which is a really good read. Anyway, his kind of vacation to this new land would definitely change the world. And in the video, it goes through kind of him getting to the Galapagos, but before that, he's in South America and he's like finding kind of these fossils and going, what animal does this go to? He's trying to start to make connections. Darwin's discoveries in Alfred Russel Wallace are also, again, I mentioned him already, very similar in time span, virtually coming up with the same theory at the same time of natural selection. So species are like animals and plants, but have variation, right? Again, we're the same species as humans, but if you look at us, we look different. The definition for species that you all need to know for this class is that there is a line of what speciation means, and that is that you create reproductively viable offspring, okay? And what that means is, again, when you try to cross species, like the good old classic kind of horse and donkey, two different species, when they breed, they make a mule, but the mule and mules themselves are actually, they cannot produce viable offspring. It's a dead end, right? And it's because the genetics just don't match up enough. Same thing is true with tigers and lions. You can create a liger, but that liger is going to be not viable in terms of creating offspring. So you cannot have a family of ligers from that first kind of group of ligers. So that's speciation. We used to think that humans and Neanderthals were separate species, right? That we couldn't interbreed to create viable offspring. Well, now that we've done the genome on Neanderthal, approximately 2% of everybody's blood who is European or Asian ancestry has Neanderthal blood in them, right? So we know that they produce viable offspring, so we're not actually separate species. So again, there's a little bit of trouble. It's more like we're cousins or distant kind of relatives that we haven't seen in a long time or look like, but definitely not different species. Darwin becomes obsessed with his finches. The finches are when he's on the Galapagos, he discovers that there's finches on the beach with kind of longer bills for getting into the sand, and then there's finches for in the wood, in the forest that have these like hardier bills for picking through bark. So he sees that they're all kind of generally looking the same, but very much different niches within that environment. And he kind of comes up with the idea that habitat determines biological adaptation. This, to a certain degree, is kind of environmental determinism, which is your habitat and or what you're eating and the climate and all of those other things dictate what you will look like and how you will behave based on natural selection. Adaptation is characteristics that enhance the organism's ability to survive, right? And humans are very adaptive because we have these things right here, and we have full-time use of these things right here, right? So tools, building, making clothes, again, building structures that may even be built out of ice to keep us warm, creates a whole nother level of our societal sophistication because we have our good old thumbs. Natural selection as a term, it is one of the forces of evolution. I'll cover the other ones in a second. And that's that the enhanced characteristics help us become successful, and then we are successful enough to reproduce, right? So it is adaptation to your environment, and then you are well adapted to then produce viable offspring, okay? And that is natural selection. It's not survival of the fittest. Sometimes the most fit individuals, whether it be, big and muscular or whatever that looks like, to us, fitness means something different. What Darwin was talking about in terms of fitness was reproductive fitness. Sometimes the biggest, strongest people just aren't reproductively fit. and or in humans, when we talk about it, they might not be carrying individuals or individuals that can nurture children, right? So that's another kind of level, and we get into kind of some more of those cultural elements. Adaptive radiation is that out of one species branch, multiple closely related species break out. And we see this with primates. You could look at it in the rodent family, right? You get mice, rats, chipmunks, squirrels, all of that other stuff is kind of in that. And they're little tiny family differences, but they're very much from the same kind of general characteristics. And that's adaptive radiation, when things kind of spread out and move into niche environments. Gammules, which is each part of the body part contains a particle that could be passed on to the offspring. So there's again, this gets into gametes and kind of sex cells and some of those other things that parents pass down to their children. Wallace is a geographic distribution of animals, kind of does those studies and looks at coloration in animals. So camouflage and some of those other things is really what he's looking at. All right, some other new stuff. Mendelian, and this is Gregor Mendel. He's a monk and looks at, again, the P's that we talked about. This is an example of a Punnett Square. And we're pretty much going to focus on the 4-box Punnett Square. So if you look at kind of the top section of that box where it has a big B and a little b, and it says pollen, that would be the female. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So female, male, one on the top, one on the bottom, right? I may have had those backwards. So again, little b, big B on top, big B, little b on the bottom. That's essentially parents passing down, right, their own traits. Okay, so the parents essentially pass down their own genotype, right? And again, that would be matched up with the other parent that then creates kind of this option. And you can see here that the B would be recessive and 2 little b's equal a white pea flower, right? So again, this is kind of Mendelian inheritance. Genotype, again, is 2 alleles. So if you're looking at inside one of those boxes and you can see the kind of yellow box that's a big B and a big B, that is considered a genotype. Now, the phenotype is the physical expression of that genotype. So we would say that is a pink flower or purple, whatever, okay, pink, purple. That's the phenotype. That's what it looks like. The genotype is the big B, right? And then we can kind of go into that. Obviously, we can say that the big B, the pink big B, is a dominant gene, right? Because when it's matched up to a little b, which is actually, you can tell with a little b with a white flower, that would be recessive. And we'll get into this a ton, right? This is going to be the rest of the semester. Chromosomes are the strand of the DNA found in the eukaryotes, and they contain hundreds of thousands of genes. Remember when parents pass those on, we all have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, but when we pass on through our gametes or sex cells, you're only passing on 23, right? Each sex cell only has 23 chromosomes, and then they match up, and because you need one parent, and that's where you get the 46, which equals kind of, again, like your one of your squares in your Punnett Square there. Evolutionary synthesis, combination of genetics and natural selection. Population genetics, we'll get into this. This is going to be Hardy-Weinberg, and it's changes in gene frequency and those effects that either impact adaptation and or evolution. So this is a big hint, right, for the next kind of upcoming quiz as well. These are your 4 forces of evolution, which are mutation, random change in a gene, creating a new trait, okay? It is a random change. It's like, and when we get into DNA, we'll talk about it's a coding error, essentially, is what happens with mutations, okay? Gene flow is the admixture or exchange of alleles between 2 populations, okay? Genetic drift is a random change in allele frequency from one generation to the next. And then again, natural selection we talked about natural selection already, is adaptation and then passing on those genes and then successfully reproducing and creating viable offspring. Okay, so what we have is really the 4 forces of evolution are natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. And these form our evolutionary theory. These are super important. And what I will tell you is that there are some people, at least when we're looking at humans, we put there are two other optional ones that sometimes people add to this, right? And I'll explain those two. One of them is sexual selection, and that is that human beings and cultures are able to tell themselves what is beautiful and what is not, right? So essentially, because we're able to kind of convince ourselves of what is beauty, and it's not just for reproduction, we might pick mates for different reasons than some of the other animal kingdom. Okay, so that's sexual selection. Um, the other one would be mutual aid. Some people put mutual aid. It is a cultural piece, but it's definitely kind of coming out of the biology of humans, which is a lot of evolutionary biology work and biological anthropologists have essentially proved that humans are not they're not out for themselves, right? Like the self-interest theory of Thomas Hobbes in the Enlightenment era, which is all individuals just want to get ahead, and this is just how they operate. They'll eat their own if they have to. That this is not reality, right? Human beings got to where we are today because of cooperation and mutual aid, right? Is helping one another. Okay. In fact, it's the first thing that human infants learn is who to trust. It's their basic instinct, right? It was once their eyes clear after their birth, they're trying to figure out which human being to trust, right? Smile at a baby, talk nicely to the baby will smile back. If you make a mean face at the baby is going to take that as a threat, right? And nobody's taught that child anything in that way. So again, the infant child, the human, is trying to figure out who to trust right away, and that leads to mutual aid, which is how is it that people working together, right, and helping one another actually shifts maybe some of the evolutionary kind of byproducts and or these forces. Those are the two that we'll kind of talk about here and there. But the four that you're going to definitely want to know that are absolutely part of the evolutionary theory are these four: natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. Please use these definitions. They're simple, they're easy, they will get you full credit on the quizzes and tests. All right, last up is the research paper. I have posted the rubric and the research paper prompt. Okay. And again, this is obviously an in-class kind of assignment that I discuss with your neighbor or another person in class, what topics interest you. This would be something, I don't know that you need to do this as an online class, but I can add a discussion post for this as well. All right. I think that's it for the week. All right. Thanks. Have a great week.